Hello, Shotgun Squirrel here, and welcome to my review of Void Bastards. So for those of you who didn't watch the series, let's sort of get you up to speed with the rest of us. Void Bastards is a first-person roguelike strategy shooter. So first person, obviously everything's in the first person. Roguelike means that dying is sort of how you progress, or at least it's accepted part of the game. And strategy shooter, I think, is a made-up term. I've not seen it before, but basically means that rather than just shooting, you're also thinking about the best way to do the shooting. It's basically a more clever shooter. It's been developed by Blue Man Chew, and it was released in May 2019. So this is the most up-to-date review I've done, probably ever will, knowing the way I do these things. In a nutshell, Void Bastards is a series of combat challenges stitched together by a really silly plot. That's not a negative, I like a good silly plot. You start as a randomly generated character in a randomly generated galaxy. You're given a gun and you're told to go find some scrap. As you progress, you build better and better guns, fight scarier and scarier enemies while collecting rare and rarer loot. You know, standard game progression. The difference is, you do all this while laughing, because the game is really funny. We'll touch on that later. Gameplay wise, I spent a long time trying to think of a way to explain the gameplay in Void Bastards in a way that was both succinct and accurate, and it became quite hard to do. The game feels basic. I mean, let's ignore the art style and just talk about the mechanics here. It's a shooter, but it's been stripped down to the absolute basics. Like, it's been cut down. There's no going prone, there's no chest-high walls, no melee attacks, no regenerative health. You can't even aim down sights, which is obviously quite a staple of most games. You've just got a reticule on screen. You can run, you can jump, and you can shoot, and that's about it. And obviously, as I said, that sounds really basic, but I don't want to call Void Bastards basic, because it's not. What they've done is they've stripped down all the unnecessary features to better focus on what is important and what makes the game different, and that is the guns and the enemies. So, as I said earlier, the game is just a set of combat challenges. The way it works is each ship that you come across is different, both its layout and the available rooms it has, and then inside each of these ships is a different combination of enemies, and different enemies require different equipment to deal with them. Imagine, like, you know, with kids, you'd give them like a block, and inside the block were lots of these holes with different shapes, and then it would have lots of coloured, you know, blocks of those shapes, and they'd have to put them in the holes. Imagine that, but replace the holes with like gross, disgusting monsters, and then replace the coloured shapes with guns, and then, you know, just imagine ramming. You get what it means. Each enemy has a specific way to deal with them, or like a weakness that can be exploited if you have the right equipment. And that's sort of the genius of Void Bastards, taking a very basic set of mechanics, but with two design choices have made a very deep and challenging game. Design choice number one is, before you enter a ship, you can see all the information about it. So you know the ship type, so that means you sort of know the layout or what sort of rooms are going to be available. You know about any statuses that are in play, such as the power being off, or if all the enemies are out to lunch. And you also know what enemies are on board, which is the most important part. You know which enemies you're going to fight. That allows you to sort of plan ahead and think, you know, what dangers are involved based on your experiences that you've played thus far, how challenging this is going to be, and you can sort of decide whether you're going to bother with it. The other design choice they've made is they give you 15 guns, right? There's 15 items in the game that you can do damage with, or something, basically shoot with. They're not all guns, some of them are grenades, but you know what I mean, they do damage. They give you 15 of them, but you're only allowed to take 3 with you. So that means that you're restricted. You can't use all the weapons you want, so you have to sit there and you have to make a decision. Well, I'm going to fight these enemies in this sort of scenario. What do I need? And it creates this really organic problem solving, which is sometimes people struggle to get out of a proper game where that's the focus. This is more of just, you know, if you want to beat this game and get far through it, you know, you need to know these things. You need to be able to prep and prepare. And that is really solid, and probably the best thing about Void Bastards. Void Bastards is one of those games that if you took a screenshot of any moment while playing and showed it to someone who's played this game, they'd be like, that's Void Bastards. Like Borderlands, they've gone for a cel-shaded look, in this case specifically to mimic the comic book style. In fact, comic books actually feature in cutscenes. The enemies, they're sprites instead of 3D models, so there's like 6 or so different versions of them based on which direction they're looking, and whether they're angry or not, which also further reinforces that comic book style, because obviously in comic books everything's 2D. And something about the colour palette is really unique as well. I mean, I'm not a colour expert, but I feel like if you showed me just the colours that made up the game, I'd be like, that's Void Bastards. Also, in the last review, I called this section visuals, which is unfair because audio plays a big part and is quite important to games. So to call this just visuals is not fair. And hilariously, Void Bastards is actually the perfect one to switch to calling it art, because Void Bastards pairs audio with visuals in a unique way. So obviously in comic books, you've got the bam, piff, wallop. Well, you've got that in Void Bastards when creatures are making noise by walking, or you can see it through doors, not just hear it, you can see where it's coming from. Or when they explode or pop, they make various different comic book bubbles of noise, which obviously ties together that whole comic book feel. Other than that, audio-wise, there's nothing unique about it. It's your standard sci-fi type noises, other than the silly voice lines that the characters say, but we'll get into that in the conclusion. The gist of the story is that a client transport, has experienced a series of unfortunate events. I mean, they don't actually go into detail what's happened, but all the crew are gone, assumed dead, and some of the important systems that are needed. Your job is you play as one of the clients who gets rehydrated, because apparently they're all existing in crisp packets, and you need to go out into the void and collect the necessary items from derelict ships to rebuild these missing systems. If you die, your body's left there. Just the organic thing's just dead on the floor, no one cares about you, and your backpack, because it apparently has some form of sentience, actually takes all your stuff back, gives it to a new client who you then play with the rest of the way. Because of obviously this reborn mechanic, there's no personal growth, there's no personal development, there's no deep lore, because that's not the point of this game. This game's not about story, this game's about having fun with the mechanics. Without thinking too much about it. In fact, it deliberately pokes fun at itself. I mean, the reborn mechanic doesn't make any sense. It's just silly, so the whole thing is a joke. They even make a joke about the fact that you pick up food in this game, but it's always cheese and onion sandwiches, so there's jokes about that. Even something so silly as you can't fly backwards on the map screen. The reason for it is so that you have to be limited between what choices you make as you go. But they pass it off as, that's simply not done, old bean. There's no reason for it. It's just a joke. And that brings me perfectly to the conclusion, which is the game is really funny. I've said it a lot throughout this review. The game is funny. That's why you want to play this game, because it's funny. I don't know if it's my bias, because being British and the whole thing being tipped towards taking the piss out of British stereotypes. I don't know, but I was giggling the whole way through. The main NPC character is a monocle-wearing computer. He has some great lines. You've got Scottish pirates who swear as only a Scot can. I mean, you ask the Scots, they're proud of their swearing. And then you've got these teenage chavs who just shout abuse at you while you shoot them in the face. The game is just a laugh. I mean, I was trying to think of some negatives for it, and I guess it can be a bit repetitive when you're looting items, but even that is a joke. I mean, have you seen the names on some of the items? The only one I can remember off the top of my head now is Distended Testicle, but there are some classic names for items you pick up. The other negative I thought of was the difficulty can spike, but that's kind of a consequence of it being randomly generated. I mean, if you get unlucky with how the enemies spawn or what type of enemies you get on a ship layout, it can suddenly go from, oh, I'm fine, to, oh my god, I can't deal with this. But that's just the nature of it being randomly generated. Fundamentally, the game is great. I mean, I've really, really enjoyed it. It's got solid bones, mechanics are great, it's very funny, and I mean, who doesn't want to play a game where you get called twatface repeatedly? Shotgun Squirrel out.